everyone's life that are momentous and life-altering. Days when all of your life experiences are condensed into one decision. Today is that day for me. My wife Sandra, my family, and I invite you to join us on a great adventure, a quest to become elected the governor of the great state of Georgia.
We continue our leadership series interviews tonight. We'll be joined on set by Representative Doug Collins, Governor Nathan Deal's floor leader. I'm now joined on set by two co-sponsors of Governor Deal's Hope Bill from opposite sides of the aisle. House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams of Atlanta is here. Representative Abrams is a Democrat. And Representative Doug Collins of Gainesville, a Republican. Representative Collins is Governor Deal's floor leader. Thank you both for being here.
Shortly after Nathan Deal took office as governor, fate smiled on Doug Collins again. Population growth in Georgia required that a new 14th U.S. House district would have to be carved out of the existing 13. New lines drawn to allow each new House district to represent approximately the same number of people. Here's the old map of Georgia U.S. congressional districts prior to 2012. Notice that Gainesville and Hall County, the area of Governor Deal's strongest support, are located in the far eastern portion of the district. Naturally, as one considers areas farther away geographically from Nathan Deal's hometown, the governor's base of support would subside. Not a problem. In August of 2011, the governor, Speaker Ralston, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, also a Gainesville native, would call a special session of the Georgia legislature, the purpose to carve out a new 14th district and reset the lines in all the old districts within a month. With Speaker Ralston and the governor's floor leader, Doug Collins, to shepherd the governor's proposal through the House, and with Casey Cagle to run it through the Senate, Gainesville and Hall County would now be situated in the very heart of the new 9th District, thus cementing the favor of any Gainesville politician seeking statewide or even federal office. Right on cue, shortly thereafter, Doug would announce his intention to run for Congress in the 9th District, where there would be no incumbent to defeat. You see, another establishment politician, previous 9th District U.S. Representative Tom Graves, coincidentally decided to leave the 9th and stepped over to the newly created 14th District, which allowed both Collins and Graves to seek office where there would not be an incumbent. In short, things could not have worked out better for the two young aspiring career politicians, Tom Graves and Doug Collins. As an added advantage, now all three, the governor, lieutenant governor, and Speaker of the House, would call Georgia's 9th District their homes. The path to become elected to Georgia's 9th District seat would be arduous. The opening left by the departing Graves attracting the attention of two more congressional hopefuls, conservative talk show host Martha Zoller and late entry into the campaign educator Roger Fitzpatrick. Although Fitzpatrick was a late entry to the field of candidates, in the primary he attracted over 22,000 votes, forcing a runoff between Collins and Zoller. The runoff campaign between Collins and Zoller became contentious. It was during this time Doug Collins, funded mightily by the governor's network of corporate financial supporters, would employ a favorite tactic of the establishment, publishing half-truth allegations against his opponent, spending from a massive campaign war chest funded by the governor's network of private contributors, circulating those allegations widely and overwhelming his weaker financed opponent's ability to effectively respond. Governor Deal's establishment campaign consultant, one known as the Stone Ridge Group, created a mailer for Doug, sending it to all corners of the 9th District, questioning the position of the decidedly pro-life Zoller in the public mind. taking statements from her decade on the air as a talk show host and snippets from her book out of context, creating a case to the voters that Martha Zoller was really pro-choice in one of the most pro-life districts in the country. Here are two excerpts recorded at campaign forum stops leading up to the July 2012 runoff.
I don't know about you, but it's been getting a little hot outside in the last few days. And especially over the last week, the rhetoric in this race has gotten a little bit heated as well. In fact, Martha's even called me a liar. And the question I have, because we put up a website and part of a flyer that said cmarthasayit.com, in which we basically put her own statements and events from when her interviews are on air. The question that I have, Martha, for you is these reports were put up with no editorialized, they were just simply your statements. Is there any one of those statements, can you point to just one, that was not you saying?
Well, I said it, but they were taken out of context and they were misquotes and they were not complete transcripts of what I said. And yes, some of those things I said, but you took them out of context and you know you took them out of context. And I stand by the support that I have gotten from organizations like Susan B. Anthony and Georgia Right to Life and the organizations that have looked at my record over the course of 15 years. You guys know me. I am the Tea Party conservative firebrand candidate, and I'm going to represent you in Congress. Just want to address a couple of things that Doug said. I mean, he implied that I was not pro-life. I am pro-life. I do believe in an exception for life of the mother, but I have been endorsed by Susan B. Anthony List and Georgia Right to Life. And Georgia Right to Life reaffirmed their endorsement of me and said that I am pro-life and that they have looked at my record. I also do not support civil unions. And Sarah Palin and Rick Santorum and others do not support people who support civil unions. So I just wanted to clear that up. I'll be around to take any questions that you might have, and I certainly want to answer anything that's happening.
Yes, sir. I just, I need to address that since she brought it up. And I think that when I brought it up, she responded. I want to make the response. Here it is. The record for Martha is what she said. And what she said about is she wanted to keep abortion legal. She said that even in this campaign during forums, and she's used the life of the mother exception to say that's why she wants to keep it legal. That's the pre-Roe versus Wade argument. But even before Roe v. Wade, the life of the mother was always considered in these times. That's a consideration that I just don't have. I don't want to see it maintained being legal. I want to see it outlawed. And as far as civil unions, even her own campaign put out a comment that said after the marriage amendments passed, then I would not be concerned about what others would do with their private contracts. That's a civil union. That's why I said it. That's why we documented it. And that's why we backed it up. And that's why I said it today. And I believe there is a true choice here. This is not an issue that you can look at. You can look at from what we said and how we go about it. But this is a conservative issue. I'm the conservative candidate that is running in this district.
With the race finally over, Doug Collins had won the much-coveted 9th District U.S. House seat. The AP reporting, a state lawmaker with close ties to Governor Nathan Deal won a Republican primary runoff Tuesday for a new congressional seat built on the governor's home turf in North Georgia. Perhaps you're beginning to see just how an establishment politician gets off to a good start. The big day had finally arrived. It was time for the freshman congressman to assume office. The AJC reporting soon after, Doug Collins has arrived at a tense, fractious moment for the U.S. Congress, a fact apparent from his first official duty, voting for the Speaker of the House. Collins voted for John Boehner, unlike several of his conservative colleagues who openly defied the Speaker. But according to Doug, those who voted against Boehner for Speaker did so because they were tired. According to the AJC, Collins already had a leg up on some of his other freshman congressmen. Quoting Collins, meeting lobbyists who have an interest in legislation has prepared me. Collins' unwavering devotion to Speaker Boehner would come to serve as an albatross with his constituents in the 9th District, twice voting for the establishment icon during his 2 terms in Washington. But while the folks back home may have grown increasingly dissatisfied and concerned, Speaker Boehner would reward his protege with regular assignments as acting Speaker of the House. After demonstrating his loyalty for a second time voting for the unpopular Speaker, Boehner handsomely rewarded Doug, placing him on the elite House Rules Committee as well as making him vice chair of a House Judiciary Subcommittee, a trusted insider now. Doug became one of the newest members of the Rules Committee, which holds jurisdiction over every piece of legislation coming to a vote by the whole House of Representatives. Because of that committee's central role in the passing of House legislation, only the Speaker's most trusted House members ever make it onto the House Rules Committee. Eventually, halfway through Doug's second term, the pressure against Speaker Boehner for his years of catering to special interests was too much for Doug's Washington mentor to withstand. John Boehner, on whom Doug Collins had counted on to advance in the Congress, would finally resign. To continue his political path upward in an establishment political environment, Doug Collins would have to hitch his wagon to a new political rainmaker, voting without hesitation for new establishment favorite Paul Ryan, once again defying the calls from home to vote against the establishment's choice from Wisconsin. Doug's committee assignments secure all that would remain for Doug to remain in office for his third term would be to convince the good folks back home that while they were going to work and conducting their lives each day, Doug had been diligently working to protect their interests. But Doug would discover that that would be a tall order, given his legislative record folding to the House leadership and special interests. That's because for the last 3 years, and then into his fourth, Doug Collins consistently voted against the interests of his constituents and for those interests championed by Boehner, and now Ryan, and the establishment leadership, and their corporate sponsors. Since taking office, Doug voted with the House leadership over 90% of the time. Doug voted for Boehner for Speaker twice. Doug voted for Paul Ryan. Doug voted to spy on his constituents in defiance of the Fourth Amendment. Doug voted to once again bail out Wall Street banks, this time in advance of them even requesting. Following John Boehner's orders, Doug voted to take his constituents' hard-earned tax dollars to train Islamic radical forces to ally along ISIS to overthrow a Syrian regime that had done nothing to America and posed no threat. During his 2 terms in Congress, Doug voted for the Ryan Murray budget deal, increasing spending dramatically. In 2014, Doug voted for H.R. 59, a continuing resolution to fund the government, thus bypassing any fiscally responsible budgetary process. Doug voted for the Cromnibus, the Omnibus, and voted to fund every Title X Planned Parenthood appropriation, and then came home attempting to sell his constituents that he did not vote to fund abortion. Now remember how vocal Doug was accusing Martha Zoller of being pro-choice. Keep that in mind here. In September 2015, Doug made a big show, ostensibly going against House leadership when he refused to sign on to a continuing resolution that of course carried without his vote, according to Doug at the time. He refused to vote for the measure because it did not contain a specific prohibition against federal funding of Planned Parenthood. Now fast forward to December, time to consider the year-end omnibus spending package to fund the government in 2016. The omnibus contained no specific prohibition against federal funding for Planned Parenthood. For Doug, the overriding concern, however, was not protecting the unborn, but rather to save the state of Georgia the money required to litigate a water rights case with the state of Alabama. Collins expressing, "The win for Georgia water rights was too important for me not to support this bill." And so under the spending authorities of the omnibus, nothing changed since September, yet faced with the political realities and the possibility of repercussions from the Speaker, Doug folded his tent, violating his major principle, voting to fund Title X with no specific prohibition against federal funding of Planned Parenthood. Doug claims to this day that the infamous Hyde Amendment is the necessary provision included in the omnibus that prevents federal funding of abortion. Nothing is further from the truth. Any federal dollar going to Planned Parenthood is $1 less needed to fund overall operations. That dollar can be used to finance abortion operations. The Hyde Amendment is simply a smokescreen. Oh, but never fear. After Doug voted to fully fund Title X with no restrictions on Planned Parenthood's use of federal funding, after receiving an earful from the 9th District voters, in January, Doug helped to sponsor a bill to unfund what he just voted to fund, which of course President Obama promptly vetoed. Of the bill, Doug said the legislation contains provisions that would defund Planned Parenthood for a year. And so while Doug contends that the omnibus bill did not fund Planned Parenthood, Doug subsequently sponsored a bill to defund Planned Parenthood he claimed was not funded. What the voters saw in January is a prime example of what many in the 9th District have recognized as Doug's patented dog and pony show.
Here is an excerpt of recent statements by Georgia 9th District U.S. Representative Doug Collins concerning his feelings about federal government control over education nationwide.
Because one of the things that we talk about in jobs in this committee and regulatory in this committee is we need an educated workforce. But yet we have an ever-expanding Department of Education up here, many of which have never been in a classroom. Educators sitting in a cubicle saying, here's how you teach kids, and have never taught in a classroom. It's not the fact if regulation matters. It's the fact of Washington on steroids thinking we know better than everywhere else.
In this video, Georgia 9th District U.S. Representative Doug Collins criticizes U.S. government control over education. But while he makes a nice show for the camera, as is his pattern, in 2015 Doug Collins followed the wishes of House leadership and voted for the federal government to maintain the tightest rein over the education standards of America's children. He did that when he voted for S. 1177, the Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA was nothing but a dog and pony show to make it appear that control over education standards was being returned to the states, expressing that the U.S. Department of Education could not legally mandate Common Core. But what the DOE cannot mandate directly, it mandates through other insidious means. Under ESSA, the states are fully accountable to the U.S. Department of Education. But while the bill Doug Collins voted for requires accountability for education to the states, it did not grant authority over education standards. Under ESSA, authority over education standards, in every state, is retained by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education. Here's how the ESSA dog and pony show works. Under ESSA, which Doug Collins voted for, each state must submit an education plan to the U.S. Secretary of Education. That sounds nice, as if the states have some discretion over the content of those plans. But they don't. That is because each state plan must include the same standards of achievement as compared with all other states. And each state plan must utilize the same nationally recognized tests, so to provide data which can be compared across all states. And since most states have already implemented Common Core, in practical terms, the only standards available for states which can fulfill this ESSA mandate is Common Core. ESSA expands the control of the federal government over assessment testing. Furthermore, ESSA provides for the U.S. government to mine the data gleaned from a testing system that is uniform across all states. This data will be used to not only ensure that all states adequately educate according to Common Core standards, but also to place America's children along a career path chosen, not by students and parents, but by central planners. And Doug Collins says he is not for the U.S. government regulating education among the states? If that is true, then why did Doug vote for ESSA? The real reason ESSA passed into law? Money. According to congressional watchdog group MapLight, each Georgia US representative voted on this bill according to the majority of contributions he received. In fact, that is practically true for the entire House of Representatives, only 10% voting against the wishes of the majority of their contributors. As an example, groups who supported the passage of ESSA contributed $53,700 to Doug Collins' campaign fund. But those who opposed its passage only contributed $2,250. Doug Collins voted yea on ESSA. By contrast, Doug's colleague in Georgia's 10th District, Jody Heiss, received only $18,300 from those who supported the bill, but $28,094 from those who opposed it. Heiss voted no. The 9th District is not served by a representative who votes according to the will of his major contributors. The 9th District can only be served by a representative who votes according to the will of the 9th District, regardless who might contribute to a campaign. As a result of ESSA becoming law, and Doug Collins' support of the bill, Georgia and the entire country is forced to conform to an education system that completely excludes parent, teacher, and student voices and replaces them with federal authority. The only way for states to avoid the federal education agenda is to refuse the federal money. The Every Student Succeeds Act is an unjust law. It is unconstitutional. It is bought and paid for by special interests. And so, just so you know, while Doug Collins speaks against federal control of education, he votes for the exact opposite. This is just another typical Doug Collins dog and pony show.
If that is the regulatory environment that this country wants, then we're headed straight for disaster. I don't have any questions.